If you're wondering, what does a retired Microsoft employee think of Linux versus Windows? Well, I've got an interesting little article here for you. It's actually pretty freaking short, which, let's be honest, that's how we all like it. Short and sweet, to the point. So I'm just gonna go ahead and read it for you, just in case there's no chance of you actually checking it out on your own. It's really short. Let's just go over it. So on usability, this retired Microsoft OS engineer's opinion of usability on Linux. Linux itself lacks a proper user interface beyond the command line. That command line can be incredibly powerful, particularly if you're adept with Bash or ZSH or similar, but you can't really describe it as particularly usable. Okay, we'll address that in a second. Of course, most distributions do come with a with a desktop user interface of some kind if you prefer, but as a bit of a shell designer myself, if I might be so bold, they're generally pretty terrible. At least the Mint distribution looks pretty nice. Okay, let's address the first problem here. You're telling me that the user interface beyond the command line is not good? Hey, dipshit, you choose it. You choose your user interface. Hell, you can build your own. Complaining about whichever one you choose not looking good, well, kind of shines on your intellect there, buddy. Wow. Okay. Okay. And then also, the command line not being as particularly usable or whatever. What the absolute fuck are you talking about, dude? Like, have you ever tried to use the command line in Windows? It's just as usable, if not less usable than Linux. What? Like, I mean, it's passable, the command line on Windows. I mean, as far as I know, anytime I went in there to do something, it worked. It was not particularly usable or useful. So I don't know. I mean, if you're supposed to be comparing it to Windows, okay. Windows, on the other hand, includes by default a desktop shell interface that, if you set aside the entirely subjective design aesthetics, okay, we're gonna address this, is professionally designed. Okay, so you're telling me if I set aside entirely subjective design aesthetics, that is professionally designed. Essentially, so what you're saying is if you put aside your own opinions, it's professionally designed. I mean, I guess if professionally designed means there were pros that designed it, yeah. But normally when people think of professional design, it's design that works well and looks good. And Windows doesn't. The only reason anyone out there thinks Windows looks good is because if you compare it to the last version of Windows, maybe it's gotten better. Maybe. Depends on which version you compare it to. Professionally designed. God, get the fuck out of here. Usability tested and takes into consideration the varying levels of accessibility required by people with different limitations in terms of usability, particularly if you decide to include accessibility in that metric. Windows comes out ahead. Get the fuck out of here. That usability, like, argument, my grandmother uses Linux. My grandmother uses Linux. She's almost 80 and she uses Linux. She also knows how to go into the GNOME settings and change stuff like her volume and stuff. Because guess what? It's actually much, much easier than on Windows. It's much straightforward, much better laid out for her. I don't like GNOME, but again, that's called subjective opinions. And in her subjective opinion, GNOME is professionally designed. So you can't, something being professionally designed is inherently subjective. again, unless your definition for professionally designed is that pro has worked on it. But then again, like, I mean, I'm trying to think of what is the worst game out there that you can think of. Just think about that game. That worst game ever made. There probably were professionals working on it that just screwed it up. So would you call that game professionally designed? No, you wouldn't. You'd call it shit. So let's just move on updates, because this is beautiful to read. I love it. Windows users are well served by a dedicated Windows update team at Microsoft. Sure, I am sure they are dedicated to keep their jobs. That's about it. Yeah. Because if they start slacking, you better believe their ass is getting a boot and they are out. But that's only because Windows updates already suck ass, so they have to keep on their game to keep that job. But the process has occasionally had its hiccups and growing pains. It's very easy to update a Linux system, and while there's no professional team sitting by the big red phone ready to respond to zero-day exploits, the updates do come out with reasonable alacrity, and in some cases you can even update the kernel without rebooting. Because the Windows update team has always got my back. Always. When I'm doing something important and they want to fix a zero-day exploit and they ruin my video or anything else that I'm working on to update my system, thank you, Windows. I love it. Dude, what is going on right now? Keep in mind, however, that Linux is a monolithic kernel, which means that it's all one big happy kernel. Almost everything is in there. If they hadn't started to add the ability a few years back, you'd be rebooting for every driver install. So I don't get the point. Because the Linux kernel does what it should, you're trying to make that out into a negative. Like, I mean, you are really, really grasping for straws right now. Like, really. All right, let's keep on going. This is interesting. This is valuable information you need to know. So, the reality is that some parts of the Linux kernel are just going to require a reboot, just as some parts of the Windows system are going to as well. I think we can all likely agree, however, that the Windows software is hardly selective about rebooting the system, and you're asked to do it far more often. He actually said something true. I mean, not that he was lying or anything before, but he stated the entire truth. Yeah, Windows sucks ass and asks you to reboot a lot more. Cool, okay. Glad you're stating fact. While we're on the topic of upgrades, we can't overlook the fact that upgrades are generally free in the open source world, unless you're using a pre-built distribution from a vendor. To its credit, though, I don't remember the last time Microsoft actually charged for an operating system upgrade if you were just a normal end user or enthusiast. Still, this point goes to Linux. Okay, cool. All right. I think he gave Windows way too much credit here. Way too much credit. It's sad to see someone who, it's clearly that they have a lot of respect for the people at Microsoft, but yet he also seems pretty, I don't know, uninformed when it comes to the UI and usability when it comes to Linux. Yeah, it may be difficult to get the type of UI that you consider gorgeous for yourself, depending on what you want. Something like GNOME is super easy, but it depends on what you want. However, there is no reason why you should complain about that, because you can pick a distro with that type of UI, install it, maybe make some minor tweaks, or if you happen to have someone who knows a lot about technology or computers, which, let's be honest, almost everyone out there does. Perhaps like my grandmother, you could just have someone install the Linux operating system for you, give it to you, and then just ask questions for about an hour, maybe two. And then if we forget something, give me a call. By the way, I've been waiting for that call from my grandmother to be like, hey, something's not working, or I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to do that. I haven't gotten that phone call yet. And if you're someone out there who's installed, you know, a very user-friendly distribution of Linux for a family member, most likely you either haven't gotten the phone call, or when you do get the phone call, you have to like chuckle a little bit because it's super simple questions. Like, I mean, my mom runs Linux too, and she had to ask me whether or not she should press the software update button. Like, you know, the software update center in Ubuntu popped up and asked her if she wanted to update her system. And she had to add, like, she asked me if that was okay. And here's the thing. You think Windows would have done that? All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun talking about this. And by the way, to the writer of this article and whoever is talking about it, I'm not even gonna go back through and figure out everybody's names. I'm not calling you out or anything. I think your take on Windows is funny. That's it. I think you give Windows a little too much credit. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm wrong because I side pretty heavily with Linux here, but you know, everyone is subjective and has their own opinion, and you have the right to it. And I think it's funny that today in the world that we live in, it's really, really hard to get people to understand, hey, it's okay to have your opinion and it's okay for me to have my opinion, and we should be able to talk about it and then move on, because there's a lot more to talk about and enjoy. So yeah, hopefully you liked the video. If you did, press that like button, hit the subscribe button. I post videos pretty frequently. And then if you want to support the content that I make here, head on over to LBRY or Odysee, link in the description, and check me out over there. You can earn some great crypto. It's LBC. That's what you earn using that platform, and it respects your privacy. And then what you can do is take the rewards that you've earned and possibly give it to the creators that you really like. And it helps a ton. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.